Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 461. A Fierce Showdown Part 4, Face to Face with the Devil. Northern leaped directly into the heart of the storm, which was raging thunderously with vicious gales, relentless tsunamis, and two distinct forms of flames. One crimson, the other ominous like tendrils of darkness. In that brief and fleeting moment when he used the black flame to cleave the storm, he noticed something happen. The potency and increased consuming ability had indeed surpassed what he expected, devouring all the elements in its path. For that moment, Northern witnessed an uncanny phenomenon. Due to the intensity at which the black flames consumed everything, it seemed like space itself was being consumed. The space, along with the physical essence of the rising sea, appeared to be losing its stability. This was the reason why he instantly switched to Chaos Eyes. As he lunged into the mouth of the storm, directly at that particular tier, Northern wrapped his hands in void essence. They were like thick darkness, like air, clothed and dancing on his hands, turning them pitch black. He plunged them into the ripped space with a crazed grin etched on his face. As he began to fall, Northern held tightly onto what his hands had grabbed with all his might. He made sure not to let go, even as he fell toward the sea. The object started to stretch out like rotten flesh, but it seemed to resist greatly, trying with all its might to return to the ripened space that was already merging back together. But it seemed like Northern's grip was like unnatural sticky glue. No matter the strength the strange creature applied to break free from Northern's hold, it was utterly useless. Northern finally fell into the sea, with an unnaturally elongated part of the monster's flesh. The space was now remaining just a spot to close up. However, the drawn-out flesh hindered the spot from closing completely. This caused the space to eject the foreign object that hindered its regeneration completely. Something spewed out of the space, tumbling across the ocean's surface before finally sinking. Northern had instantaneously let go of the flesh in his hand because the thing threatened to pull him along with the sudden ejection of the monster. Aerosiles came down, grabbing him with its leg. Northern climbed up to the back of the creature as it flew upward. The creature immediately landed on the ship, and Northern came down, walking toward the back with his eyes set on the point where the creature had sunk into the water. The storm in front of them had calmed down. The waters were slowly regaining their peace, as were the clouds. There were no traces of the crimson flames and black flames anymore. The black flames had consumed the crimson flames, while space itself had vanquished the black flames, simply erasing their existence in that portion of space as it regenerated. The atmosphere was cooling. Northern's armor began to materialize, the black surface glistening as it appeared on his body. The mark it had received from Kaal still stood there, a testament to the tough battle. Onyx horns twisted out of Northern's head as the armor finished forming on his body. Then a black cloak appeared on him, fluttering gently in the ocean breeze. Northern stared keenly at the waters behind, and very soon, it began to ripple. He narrowed his eyes and clenched his fist tightly on the Soul Taker. Several other monsters were still in battle underwater. Of course, the battle was not in favor of Northern's monsters. However, neither he nor they cared. All he focused on was vanquishing the Kirathon, which he had forcefully pulled out in its true form. This time without having to unweave thousands of ligatures. The surface of the water rippled and began to drive closer toward him. Something beneath was rushing toward him with immense speed and power. Northern's grip on Stainless tightened for the second time as he stood on the edge of the ship, ready to lunge into the air. The creature burst out of the water in an outrageous splash, a nightmarish amalgamation of sinew, bone, and distorted form. It headed for the surface of Northern's ship, but Northern had already taken off, clashing with its multiple limbs midair as both plummeted downwards. A black rift broke out at the ocean's surface as Northern extended his hand, swallowing both of them. The ocean's surface became calm. Underwater, there was a slight battle going on, but it mattered little to the significance of the true battle and didn't entirely disturb the newfound peace of the surroundings. Meanwhile, all Jessie could do was helplessly watch as everything unfolded, while the true reality of Northern's strength registered in her mind. Throughout the demonstration, she began to doubt the truth she knew. She told herself multiple times as she watched him, "No way, he can't be a nomad." She had been fortunate enough to see the Tower Sage and the Emperor battle each other, even though it was just a mock battle. She had also seen the two ascendants fight each other while training. And the level of combat prowess that Northern was displaying, his catastrophic onslaught and their effect on the sea, it was nothing less than those powerhouses. So how exactly was she supposed to believe that Northern was a nomad soul rank? If truly he was, that meant, the thought sounded so dangerous that she refused to pursue the notion. She just shook her head and muttered to herself blankly, "No, there's no way he's a nomad rank." Northern and the Kirathon plunged from the sky into the narrow canyon of the Red Mine. The creature tumbled away while Northern quickly stopped himself with friction to his feet. Since both of them were falling with momentum, the momentum continued even though their direction had switched from horizontal to vertical. He slowly straightened his back and stood upright. The Kirathon did the same, glaring at him. Northern released his grip on Stainless, materializing Soul Taker and Dark Mortal simultaneously. He looked the creature dead in the eyes and said, "Come here, you naughty boy." Chapter 462. A Fierce Showdown Part 5. The creature standing before Northern defied conventional biology. Its pale, almost sickly flesh stretched taut over a muscular frame, displaying veins and tendons that pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, as if animated by an unnatural force. Multiple elongated arms protruded from its torso, each limb ending in razor-sharp claws that curved like scythes, poised for violence. These limbs twisted and coiled around its body in an almost serpentine manner, suggesting a creature that moved with both grace and grotesque agility. Its head, crowned with a mane of long, white, braided hair, contrasted sharply against the pallor of its body, giving it an almost human-like visage marred by the feral intensity in its eyes. These eyes, a piercing yellow, gleamed with a predatory intelligence, scanning the surroundings with the keen perception of a hunter forever on the prowl. Sharp fangs jutted from its maw, completing the look of a creature bred for predation and survival in a realm far removed from any human concept of nature. The creature's joints and flesh were interwoven with dark, fleshy tendrils that snaked across its form like parasitic veins, occasionally twitching and coiling as if they possessed a mind of their own. Its entire structure exuded a sense of violent purpose, a being sculpted by the chaotic tapestry of a realm beyond reason, where its every movement blurred the line between organic and monstrous. Northern glared at the visage of the creature, his face contorting with irritation. The Kirathon let out a guttural screech that reverberated through the entire mountain. The mining field shook with tremors, and the soul summons currently mining paused and staggered back in fear. Even Linus and his subordinates, who were also mining, dropped the tools in their hands and looked towards the direction of the screech. A tense frown appeared on Linus's face, one that showed he was extremely wary of certain things. First was the enormous monster that fell from the sky. Now this monstrous scream? What is this guy up to? He sincerely hoped that whatever Northern was doing would ultimately drive him to his own ruin. Then he would be able to break out of this place. But right now, he had no choice but to observe how truly powerful this kid he had underestimated was. He picked up his tool, an air of nonchalance wafting around him while others still seemed concerned about what was going on. The soul summons most especially showed a level of concern that was equal to a creature fearing for its monarch. The creature let out another bellowing screech that seemed to roll the dark skies of the limitless void. It laid its evil eyes on Northern. Then, with a mad speed that belied its size, it vanished, moving like a blur and appearing right in front of Northern. It opened its maw, black streaks of light gathering at the point of opening. Instantly, It shot a black ball of light directly at Northern's face. But Northern didn't need to deflect. This was the limitless void after all. The force of defense was permanently up. Northern was in his own soulscape. This was a domain that the Kirathon would never be able to win. The black energy discharged and exploded like a nuclear bomb, raising the landscape with ravaging intensity. But Northern was still standing, the land beneath his feet untouched while the surrounding terrain had been eaten away. The air simmered with residual heat, the aftermath of the explosion still crackling like distant thunder. The creature's screech, now mingled with frustration, echoed through the void, only to be swallowed by the vast emptiness. Northern's eyes narrowed. There was no time for arrogance, not here. He moved, not with the speed of desperation but with the precise, measured pace of someone who had traversed these battlefields countless times. He lunged, the dark blade in his hand slicing through the dense air of the limitless void with a whisper of death. The Kirathon reacted. A flurry of its elongated limbs whipped forward. A chaotic barrage of scythe-like claws aimed to rend Northern's flesh from bone. Northern twisted his body, each movement a calculated dodge that allowed him to glide through the onslaught like smoke through a battlefield. Claws slashed mere inches from his face, the wind from their force tugging at his armor, but none found purchase. In a split second, Northern's stance shifted. He pivoted on his heel, his momentum carrying him low beneath the creature's guard. The onyx blade glimmered in the dim light of the void, thrusting upward, seeking the unprotected underbelly of the Kirathon. The blade struck. It plunged deep into the pale, sickly flesh, meeting resistance as if biting into something both organic and not. A hiss erupted from the creature, not of pain but of sheer indignation, its form shuddering as dark tendrils lashed out from the wound like frantic serpents. They coiled around Northern's arm, searing hot against his armor, each tendril pulsing with a rhythmic thrum that resonated with the erratic beat of the creature's unnatural heart. Northern gritted his teeth, feeling the burn of the tendrils seeping into his flesh, attempting to tear his arm away. But he held firm, driving the dark blade deeper, twisting his other hand and bringing the blade with deliberate cruelty, slashing across another part of the Kirathon's underbelly with the soul taker. The Kirathon reared back, wrenching its body away from the weapon embedded in it, the tendrils snapping back into its form with a wet, slithering sound. A thick, viscous fluid, dark as the darkness itself, oozed from the wound, dripping to the ground where it sizzled and hissed upon contact. With a roar that shook the foundations of the limitless void, the creature lashed out, its many limbs moving with the speed of 1,000 striking serpents. Northern was ready. He shifted his stance, following the principles of Chaos Step, his body flowing like water as he slipped past the first assault, his movements fluid and unbroken. He brought the soul taker up in a sweeping arc, deflecting the next strike, then spun, his foot connecting with one of the creature's outstretched arms, sending it sprawling back. But the Kirathon was relentless. It recovered with disturbing agility, its limbs coiling and uncoiling as it launched itself at Northern once more. This time it moved with a vicious intent, no longer the wild, unfocused aggression of before. It had learned. It adapted. Its movements became more deliberate, each strike calculated to corner Northern, to cut off his escape routes and force him into a fatal misstep. Chapter 463, Final Showdown. Perhaps even the Kirathon had no idea what it was up against, how the battle had been decided since the first moment they stepped into this realm. The monster, despite the many lacerations that appeared on its body, did not slow down. Each step grew increasingly hasty and ferocious, and frustratingly to the Kirathon, Northern was gracefully matching every one of its onslaughts. Easily so, if to say. The monster lunged all its arms forward in a barrage of attacks, neglecting how far it was from its opponent. Northern had at first reared his head back in surprise. From that distance? However, his eyes widened as he saw the monster's hands stretch forward continuously. Indeed surprised, he wasn't fazed. He just stood there while the monster's hands battered against the invisible force field that constantly barricaded his reality from its. In the limitless void, the force field's potency was even more outrageous. The invisible front was a barricading repelling force that rebounded the force of attack without rebounding the source of the attack itself, hence causing the source of the attack to receive its own damage. All 8 limbs of the monster withdrew suddenly, contracting like elastic. Its legs, absorbing the force of contraction, leaped like a spring, shooting its entire mass into the sky. Northern looked up at the monster, wondering, "What are you doing now?" As the Kirathon reached the peak of its flight power, it joined all its 8 hands together and pointed them downward at Northern. "Looks like you're trying to go for a devastating attack," Northern observed. "All right then, let me show you how vast the difference in power between the two of us is." This was a realm where Northern was supreme. The Kirathon was about to understand that. As the monster plunged downward with all its 8 arms, large pores suddenly opened up by its elbows, discharging black orbs that crackled with ominous lightning. The lightning swiveled around the monster at large, and just as it neared Northern, he snapped his fingers. The monster immediately found itself back in the sky. It was like it had never moved in the first place. But the quite funny thing was that even now it was still on the move, lunging towards Northern, the black orbs swiveling around it, waiting to wreak an apocalyptic destruction. However, it was just not getting any closer to the boy standing on the ground. Then Northern opened his mouth and commented, "This is my world. Everything in this world is subject to my will and imagination." Northern smiled. "Even you?" He snapped his hand, and the Kirathon disappeared and appeared right in front of him. All hands spread wide, revealing its underbelly for Northern to strike. Brandishing his sword with masterful arcs, Northern slashed both swords onto the belly in X's. He ignited them with the Emperor's flame and twirled into the air with both of them flowing around him like extensions of himself. Then he lunged downward, slashing crude arcs on the revealed underbelly of the Kirathon, and all the while, the Kirathon was helpless and couldn't move a finger. The black orbs crackled with more intensity, connoting its increasing anger. Northern landed 10 meters away from the monster. He repositioned his grip on both swords, the edges of their blades pointing towards his back and his arms crossing over each other. His eyes narrowed with stark determination, blazing with blue light as he strutted forward, his legs immediately becoming a blur from the first step. The Kirathon still found itself trapped in an immobile state. Its humanly expression grew grotesquely furious. The creature screeched and snarled with barbarous intensity. Northern rolled in the air as he approached it, and slashed his sword in cyclones, but the monster's exoskeleton grew over its face where Northern had targeted. The sword screeched off the metallic skin, bouncing away on a spray of light sparks. Northern landed on the ground, glaring at the monster. A drop of sweat trickled down his face as he examined the creature. "Amazing, it has even bodily abilities that increase its defense. This was nothing like the other 2 times I fought it. And this better be the last," Northern's subconscious added. Having to deal with a monster that wouldn't let go of its grudge was becoming increasingly frustrating. "Our time playing together has to come to an end now," Northern said and relaxed his posture. He looked at the monster coldly, his expression unreadable. The Kirathon suddenly let out a much more ferocious roar than before, so much that Northern felt like his eardrums would burst. The creature glared at him, its eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and fear. Northern looked at the Soul Taker. "Do you want to let it all out?" The sword replied with a subtle vibration that Northern took for a yes. He looked at Dark Mortal and said to the sword, "Don't worry, your time will come." Then he dismissed the sword, focusing on the Soul Taker alone. He held the hilt of the sword with both his hands and looked straight at the Kirathon that was vibrantly trying to break free from its immobile state. Northern closed his eyes and began to excessively pour his essence into the ghostly sword. The sword's almost whitish blade began to become black as black ominous smoke began to ooze from it. The smoke grew and erupted into a turbulence of dark, ghastly flames. The same familiar burden of the writhing souls fell on his arms again. The sword immediately became heavy once more. Northern struggled more this time around. After tasting the air of freedom, it seemed the enslaved souls were putting more rigorous effort into getting out of the sword's blade. "I don't think this sword will survive," Northern speculated as he raised the sword up. And this prompted him to want to drop the sword and stop the attack, but at the same time, he had a strong feeling of instinct that he should go ahead with it. Northern just wanted to grant the soul's freedom, even if it meant losing the sword. "I have mortal blade and Granger anyways." He closed his eyes and drew the blade forward over his head. As the blade arched down, the Kirathon that was afar appeared right beneath the afflicted blade, and as both connected, a massive explosion of dark essence spread in circumference, temporarily drowning the limitless void in unseeable darkness. Chapter 464. The Soul of a Tyrant, Part 1. The darkness was not an ordinary one. It was some powerful force reacting with the void and causing a massive explosion. And this strange force did not come from the Kirathon. Northern read the notifications internally as they appeared in front of him. "You have slain Apex Maelstrom Kirathon. You have gained 20 talent fragments. You have slain a monster of Acheronix. You have gained 100 talent fragments." Northern tilted his head at the latter part of the notifications. Acheronix? What does that even mean? Of course, there had to be a special case to the Kirathon. Otherwise, it just made no sense why it was ruthlessly strong. Northern sighed and looked at the Soul Taker. As he had expected, the sword was broken. Seeing this made him click his tongue in regret. The soul damage ability of the sword was incredibly rare among the majority of his items. And it wasn't like he had so many items to begin with, not when his own drop rates were extremely low. Northern sighed and dismissed the thoughts. "That's why I have how anyway." He had been deliberately intentional about how because he needed an expenditure source for his soul cores. Now that he had found out that he didn't have many items, it seemed to him they would serve a good purpose. They were all stacked up in his bottomless bag, which was in the limitless void with Mr. Fluffy. Even now, after killing something so powerful like that, there's no item drop. Northern sighed and glared moments later. The Kirathon was a Maelstrom rank, but it felt insanely strong compared to other monsters of its caliber. He understood that it was an apex level. And the thing about apex level was that they sat at the peak of unpredictability. They were the true monsters of a certain rank. An apex level monster with just the fiend rank would probably be unkillable by 7 drifters, or as many drifters unless they outdo the monster by unreasonable numbers. And who'd pull that much for just a fiend rank monster? 7 nomad ranks would probably put up a fight, as well as a single master rank, enough to escape alive but not without losing a limb. But 2 masters would certainly slay it. Northern's deduction was coming from his experience with monsters thus far. He dismissed his whole thoughts. "Now that it is over, can I just go and rest?" As he attempted to move, he suddenly felt a tightening in his chest. It was so heavy that it stopped him from moving. Northern immediately bent and held his chest as the pain gripped his heart. He began to find it difficult to move and annoyingly could not even deduce what this strange feeling was. But it was painful. He staggered back, his vision got blurry, and on top of it, a screeching sound entered his ears. It was soft but very bothersome. He couldn't keep being on his feet, so he slumped to his knee, supporting his body with one hand on the ground while holding his chest with the other. He even dispelled the Night Terror armor at some point and squeezed his chest tighter as the pain persisted. Then suddenly, there was an overwhelming relief that washed all over him. It was like he hadn't been suffering so much that it felt like he would die just now. He sat down on the ground and slumped on his back, staring into the sky. That was when a couple of notifications began to appear before his eyes. "Congratulations, you have gained new soul summons. You have gained a unique soul summon. You have gained the incomplete soul of a tyrant. Your seed is resonating with the soul. Your seed growth phase has started. You have gained a unique talent. Link. Due to the seed in you, your nature is beginning to take effect. Along with the resonance of the tyrant's soul, a talent has been created as a countermeasure for maintenance and equilibrium purposes. So, to put it in simple terms, because I gained the soul of a tyrant, some ripple effect was caused, and now to control that ripple effect, a talent was given to me. Link. Northern was silent for a couple of seconds, digesting the information. The fact that he had just received a freebie talent from an entity he couldn't even figure out. Nexus? The system? Confused and amazed him at the same time. Northern sat cross-legged and touched his chest. I guess that pain in my chest has something to do with the soul of the tyrant or the seed sprouting. He let out a sigh and stood up. Then the scenery around him changed as he moved his feet. Northern walked forward to the hollow hall of the Void Palace, walked through the flames like they were merely illusions, and sat on his throne seat. He looked down at the notifications before finally dismissing them and thinking, the soul of a tyrant. This meant that a tyrant among several other monsters had been felled by the Soul Taker. Then Northern's mind clicked. Its reaction to the void, the power, and heaviness. Could it be the Chaos Prince? The idea, the moment he thought about it, sounded outrageous to his ears. Felt too easy to come by, and at the same time the deduction felt reasonable. But Northern hated his luck, so he didn't want to be optimistic. Having the soul of the Chaos Prince? Nah, just shoot me dead. Can't be so easy to come by. He sighed and finally decided to summon the souls. A mass of fire blew up in the center of the palace, right in front of the flames. It was an explosion of flames like clothes of darkness that wriggled with the wind. The flames themselves began to recede, and Northern could now see the forms of the souls. To his surprise, all or most of them were humanoid. No, Northern was more convinced that they were human than monsters. Maybe not human, but they were definitely not monsters. Chapter 465. The Soul of a Tyrant, Part 2. Northern turned his head down, inspecting the souls with keen perception. Soul summon. Name: Malekith. True name: the Witch King. Attributes: Old One, 5th of the Tomb Kings. Soul rank: Evanescent. Soul core: White. Talent: Circlet of Iron. Talent class: Immeasurable. Talent abilities: Chaos Grimoire, Ancient Spellcraft. Derision. Northern scratched his cheek as he observed the information. A paragon with only 3 talent abilities? Northern started counting on his right hand as he continued. A drifter has 1 talent ability, a nomad has 2, a master has 3, a savant has 4, a sage has 5. I presume an ascendant has 6, and a paragon has 7. Then he dropped his hands and looked at the panel. So, why does this paragon have only 3 talent abilities? He rubbed his chin as he thought about it. Faced with no answer, he went on to the next panel. Soul summon. Name: Eneroni. True name: Metal King. Attributes: Old One, 7th of the Tomb Kings. Soul rank: Ephemeral. Soul core: Orange. Talent: Titan Tamer. Talent class: Immeasurable. Talent abilities: The Great Vortex, Winds of Magic, The Great Wall, Ancient Fall, Beast of Burden, Chaos Tamer. This one is an ascendant and has 6 talent abilities. Which means there's something wrong with this other one. Northern's eyes drifted between the 2 soul forms as he spoke. There was no apparent difference between them. Their bodies were black and void, outlining only their humanoid frames. The rest that Northern went over had quite a semblance to the first 2. 3rd of the Tomb Kings, 4th of the Tomb Kings, 9th of the Tomb Kings. Then there were lesser ones instead of old ones who were not attributed to the kings. These ones were close to 1,000 if Northern meticulously counted. Then there was the single soul that stood out amongst all of them. He was, at a glance, taller than the rest of the crowd. He also had that form of void, but his frame was more prominent and muscled. Northern, with a breathtaking exhalation, summoned the profile of this particular one, reminding himself as he did. It's a tyrant. Name: Revunt. Attributes: Fallen Ascendancy, Vestiges of Tyranny, Tyrant's Requiem, Despair Manipulation, Soul Consumption, Dominion of the Broken. Soul rank: Celestial. Tyranny of Despair. Fallen Tyranny. Northern cocked his head a little bit left, then a little bit right. That's all. No soul core. No talent and talent ability. This was all that the system had to offer as information. And Northern had a nudging feeling that this was probably all there was to know about tyrants. They don't have a soul core. Hence, they don't have a talent. He resumed rubbing his chin. I guess tyrants not having a soul core is plausible considering that the Chaos Prince could assimilate with the Void. The one thing in common between Northern and the Chaos Prince as regards their relationship with the Void was the one thing Northern didn't have. If he had a soul core, the Void would have destroyed it already. He would either have died or, worst-case scenario, been rendered a crippled drifter. A crippled drifter is a rare case in which their cores crack. This crack leads to essence reflux. They are unable to direct their essence, and overexerting it could permanently destroy their souls. Death was the least they had to be worried about. A crippled drifter could turn out to be an insane drifter, controlled by wilding essence. Cases like this were unpredictable. In some, it would cause sleepiness. Some would become psychotic. Some could even become monsters, experiencing incredibly rare morphological mutations. The rates of these worse effects were incredibly rare, but it's not unheard of. This would have probably been his condition if he had absorbed the Void while he had a soul core. But he didn't, which proved the requirement to become one with the Void. This also meant that the Chaos Prince also did not have a soul core. He was well aware that the Chaos Prince was half origin, half tyrant. There might have been something exceptional about him in addition. But the absence of a soul core in this tyrant was enough premises for his deductions. He sighed and swallowed afterward. Then he dismissed the panel, resting his head on his hand. Damn it! I have a headache. His mind was silent for a while. Then he wondered again. What exactly do I do with these souls? Will they even be able to materialize with my clones? Or do I have to evolve the cloning talent and see what more can come out of it? He sighed once again, worried about what to do, unsure whether to call it a blessing or a curse. The soul of a tyrant was amazing. Having such a possession was a next-level game to him. But not being able to use it, and especially now that he was returning to the Central Plains, that would be so much of a letdown. Sure, he didn't need it to show his wrath to the damned principal, but Northern believed it would be a big boon if it was useful. He rubbed beneath his white bangs and blew them up a little bit. They were so long that when pulled down, a strand reached his upper lip, and sometimes they even obstructed his view. Northern leaned forward a second later and summoned a clone. The clone appeared with no beautifying effect, and next he summoned the tyrant. Unlike the clone's blank entry, it was dark, ominous, but beautifying. The soul stood next to the clone, dwarfing it. Northern stared for a moment, wondering, how in the hell did a tyrant get killed by the Soul-Taker's sword? Or should I say, who could have dared? The soul's visage alone was imposing and intimidating, far more than any other soul summon he had ever gained. The thought of turning the tyrant into a void summon filled him with so much happiness, and he could only hope that what he was about to try would turn out to be a great success. Northern examined both bodies and then commanded, "Okay. Let us start." Chapter 466. Finally, home in sight. Northern summoned, lastly, Shay, one of the creatures that the Chaos Prince had created. This time, I am going to join all three properties together. Northern let out a creepy smile. I do hope that with the property of my clone, you'll gain a human body and face. It doesn't necessarily have to look like mine. Northern shrugged and waved his hand for the experiment to begin. Immediately, he signaled, and a thick vortex of void enveloped all three bodies and began to swivel violently. The flames that burned in front of Northern grew viciously higher, giving off a more ferocious ambience. Northern gripped the handle of the chair, as even the pressure of the void flame was incredibly intense for him. Of course, it didn't pose any significant harm, but its winds alone threatened to sweep him off his seat. The raucous wind and flames persisted for a couple of minutes, with Northern intently watching. Finally, the end came. The flames dispersed suddenly with a blast of wind. Floating in the air, and slowly coming down, was a lithe, tall frame with ivory skin and lean muscles, and lustrous dark, overflowing hair. Northern, elated, and with eyes sparkling, extended his hands in a hurry and made the body stop mid-air, levitating. He walked through the flames and came up close to the body. The face was stunning and beautiful, pale and small like his, but there was a different shade of nonchalance to this one compared to his own. If he could be considered cold and indifferent, this one could be considered warm and indifferent. It strangely reminded him of a particular somebody. Sura. There's a carefree warmth that Sura has despite being an evil bastard. Of course, it's all just a facade. But the fact that the feeling was there became unsettling to Northern. He shook his head to drive the thoughts away and prolonged his gaze on the creature. Several seconds later, "Why is it not waking anyway?" Northern frowned inquisitively. "Notice, you have created a new void summon. However, you have not established special talent, link, with the creature. Hence, the void is putting the creature under a temporary slumber until link is established." Northern raised a brow. "Wait, what?" Hurriedly, he summoned the panel of the new talent. Talent name, link. Talent class, S. Description. Due to the presence of a high-profile soul, a special ability inherent to your cloning talent has become a singularity. Talent ability. Establish link, evolve link, delete link. Northern frowned in confusion. So some entity just came around and made the fact that I could link with clones I create a talent of its own? Now, isn't that amazing? He spoke lightly of it, but inwardly he was growing mad with caution and worry. Northern inspected the talent ability in silence. Establish link. Create a line of consciousness between you and a soul. To establish a link costs 1,000 talent fragments. Evolve link. Promote the link between you and a soul to the next level. This ability unlocks new link features. To evolve a link costs 1,000 talent fragments regardless of how strong the linked soul is. Delete link. Permanently erase an existing link. To delete a link costs nothing. Northern groaned in pain. He closed his eyes blankly for a second, cursing at the system in his head. "You just won't evade any chance to rob me of talent fragments, will you?" He sighed and looked down for a moment. At this point, Northern couldn't help but feel like the system itself was trying to slow down his growth. Now, whether for good reasons or bad reasons, Northern couldn't tell. But the moment it became obvious that it acted not in his interest, Northern was ready to employ a full-force plan to separate himself from the system, even if it meant dying. He sighed and looked at the floating body one more time. Then he waved his hand. As he did, stone carved out of the ground grew to form a coffin, and its top slowly opened. Northern watched the body gently settle into the coffin, after which he exhaled again and left the limitless void. What he saw the moment he appeared in the surface world shocked him quite awfully. He widened his eyes as he appeared on the deck of the ship. "Ah!" His mouth fell open. "Your Highness? Where have you been?" Jesai shouted as he appeared on the deck. She was positioned to one side of the deck, her spear shooting downwards and shattering the heads of the creatures that desperately climbed up the ship. While Night Terror and Black Mamba were inside the sea, wreaking havoc among the sea of monsters that swarmed towards them from all directions. Night Terror momentarily would jump out of the water to catch his breath, while Black Mamba had permanently adapted to the water and didn't even need to breathe air. Northern stared blankly for a couple of seconds, seriously shocked. How? His mind raced with the question in broken words. The sea was filled with so many monsters that they crowded the surface. In their eyes, he could see an annoyingly familiar madness, a bloodthirstiness that seemed to have abandoned all forms of reason. Northern frowned, paled, and was devastated. No, don't tell me," his lips muttered. The creatures dove towards them with even more wickedness and desperation. Night Terror and Black Mamba tried, but the monsters were too much, from shark-like monsters with vicious teeth to four-legged beasts with webbed feet and jagged fangs. All different shades of monsters that dwelled in the sea were obsessed with their ship, a parade to crush it at all costs. Northern stared at all of them, Then his eyes widened again as he raised them up. Behind the disaster surrounding him was a backdrop of a black, tall metallic wall, embedded in the distant clouds, and slowly becoming visible. This caused his eyes to shine with hope. "I'm home." He swiftly turned to Jessie. "Jessie, go into the ship now." Jessie, who was busy shooting her spears like she was a master fisherman, looked at Northern with a puzzled expression, then frowned a second later. "Your Highness, please, at least I can." Before she finished her statement, Northern snapped his fingers, and the entire ship suddenly disappeared, leaving a large portion of the water surface vacant. Northern grinned as he fell into the water. Then he raised both hands in jubilation and kicked his legs nonchalantly in the water. "Come at me, all of you." Chapter 467. The Border. The Border. Several decades ago, the leaders of the Central Plains came together to create an impregnable iron wall to barricade the western border of the Central Plains. This was an emergency situation after the disaster in the continent of Stelia broke out, and it was discovered that monsters were leaking out of the sea. Several teams of drifters were sent to quell the rising disaster, but none of them got past the sea. Not with the Serpentine disaster or the enormous beast of the ocean. No one got as far as the middle of the sea. It was difficult for ships to pass through, and even sometimes airships were not safe. The thought of having such powerful monsters creep up on the border of the Central Plains unexpectedly one day paled many in their frail minds. Then Ruffsburg came up with the idea of the protection wall. Several leaders bought the idea immediately, and with the intentional resources of kingdoms, the wall rose in no time. It was a dark fortress of protection, situated in the coldest region of the Central Plains. Although technologists proposed that the atmospheric condition of the western border was an unnatural phenomenon caused by the high rate of discharge of atmospheric essence because of the presence of monsters, and the northern border should naturally be the coldest. Of course, the Central Plains sat comfortably in the middle of all other three continents and could be called the western world of this epoch. In the border wall, there was nothing out of the ordinary going on. Drifters were sent to this place by the government, noble families, and kingdoms. Oftentimes, those drifters saw being sent to the mouth of disaster, such as this one, as a worse punishment than death. But even so, being a protector carried an amazing level of recognition and respect, because they are seen as the guardians protecting the continent from the monsters of the Dark Continent. However, within the walls, they undergo rigorous training and intermittent missions to the sea in order to subdue monsters that somehow find themselves offshore. And sometimes, this subjugation could tend to be so daunting that they have to follow the monster into the ocean. Many lose their lives more often than not, and a slight mistake by a captain could be extremely costly. For the past 2 days, the borders have been especially busy. Not because there was an influx of monsters as usual, no, but because of an influx of humans, students. Students that were lost for ages. A ship suddenly arrived at the shore, somehow managing to get past the sea in shambles. The aquatic fortress had managed to scale past the vast sea while enduring the damage of monsters. Its metallic body was wickedly scratched, metal plates peeling off on several parts of its body. In corners, a large dent that could only have been caused by monsters of incredible sizes could be seen. It was a miracle that it had managed to come this far. And a factor of such a miracle was no less than its enormous size and body. The obvious logo of the Lewingard Empire had been eaten off and scratched by monsters such that it was unrecognizable. Immediately, this vessel of salvation started pulling towards the shore. Several squads of protectors prepared for a large-scale subjugation operation. To their surprise, humans began to come down from the ship. Everyone was shocked until a certain protector screamed the name of his sister, who had left for the academy over 7 years ago. Abandoning all reason, he rushed and hugged her. Everyone's eyes widened and frowned with confusion. What exactly was going on? It was slow and strange at first, but the people were then paid attention to and cared for. As they arrived at the border fortress, news began to spread amongst the protectors themselves. This caused a certain one of them to go crazy, shouting as he searched the crowd of people that were brought to the border to be cared for. Northern! 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 There was no one that did not raise their head at the mention of the name, because the name in and of itself was kind of legendary. Was it the feat of single-handedly taking down a Tier 5 rift? Or the horror of Brimfield Estate, the master of the vicious night terror, and the savior to many that night? Ellis couldn't help but rush to the dark-haired man with a scar over his face, crying desperately for Northern. Not just Ellis, across the 2 nights several people would come and tell him strange things about this person, his own son. Shin, hearing these praises of some sort, felt weird. He didn't even know what to expect. His son? Or an absolute stranger? The stories that were told of him informed of an entirely different and grown man. Almost a hero. Sadly, some had other things to say that painted him quite vicious, that showed that as much as many respected him, many more feared him for the power he wielded. Even the oldest man amongst them. A lot of things have happened since Northern stepped out to go to the academy. And standing at the top of the wall, staring at the surface of the ocean, Shin couldn't help but regret the day he decided to let Northern attend that damned place. He leaned on the metallic trail of the wall and sighed. Right there, a comrade came to him and tapped his shoulder sympathetically. Shin rubbed his hands together. Each breath came out with a smoke from his mouth. Their uniforms consisted of thick clothes that protected them against the intense cold. But this night he felt awfully cold compared to other nights. Perhaps he was tense and scared. A lot of them have returned and his son is not here yet. Several things ran across his mind as he stood there. The man standing next to him suddenly shivered. Oh damn! Why the heck is it so cold this night? Shin raised a brow and stood up, saying, I thought it was just me. He narrowed his eyes towards the ocean, immediately noticing the intense fog. It was so intense that it was impossible to see the ocean at all. Shin frowned darkly. Unseen, something is wrong. Alert the commander. Something is definitely wrong. Unseen saw the urgency in Shin's eyes and immediately strode across the surface of the wall, entering a tower and finding his way down. Shin, by the way, stood at the wall, keenly inspecting the sea, forcing his eyes to see through. Suddenly, a pillar of flames erupted out of nowhere, causing the entire foundation of the fortress to tremble. Shin's frown got darker. He looked to his left and right, then closed his eyes. A very large bird, a raven, appeared above his head, spreading its wings all the way over him and oozing with an almost liquid skin. The bird's eyes were as red as Shin's. It flew forward into the thick fog to see exactly what was going on, while Shin patiently waited on the surface of the wall. A few moments later, his eyes suddenly widened. He could see a cacophony of monsters crowding the surface of the ocean. They were so numerous that it was hard to even see the water. And all of them were desperate for one single person who was viciously fighting for his life, destroying the monsters with a level of ease. Taking a closer look at the person with his familiar eyes, the guy looked like he knew what he was doing, but the numbers were outrageous. However, what Shin couldn't help but notice almost belatedly was the white hair. It was dirty and not what he remembered of his son's snow-white hair and flawless skin. But a moment's glance, where he was permitted to see Northern's face, immediately informed him, such that before Shin could tell, his legs had leaped off the wall of the fortress. Chapter 468. Welcome back. Shin found himself leaping into the air. He sprang off the top of the wall, into the bright sky, flying over an enormous distance in a single leap while drawing his sword. As his leap reached its crescendo, he muttered, Kageyama Sword Arts, Form 1, Dark Raven. Shin twisted his body in the air as he descended. A black aura like speckled smoke oozed off his sword and shrouded his entire body, forming the visage of an enormous raven of darkness, as he descended on the sea. His collision with the surface of the sea caused a mighty uproar and explosion. The impact sent waves crashing outward, a violent surge that swallowed the surrounding sea. Shin emerged from the chaos, standing atop the water's surface, the dark aura still swirling around him like a protective shroud. He scanned around with heightened senses. The part he had landed on wasn't the exact place Northern was located, but he still had eyes on him, so he knew the path to his son. However, he seemed to have attracted the attention of several monsters, as more now swam to him with furious speed. Shin frowned furiously, tightening his grip on the hilt of his sword. He could feel the raw energy crackling in the air, the impatience and anger coursing through him. With a swift motion, he dashed forward, his dark essence forming an aura around him, flickering like a dying flame before reigniting. As he approached the first monster, he leaped again, this time slicing downward with precise fury. Form 2, Distortion. A burst of speed propelled him through the air, and he became a blur, a streak of darkness that cut through the water's surface. The monster reared back, but it was too late. Shin's sword met its flesh, and a shock wave erupted, sending splinters of scales flying. The creature roared in agony, thrashing as it plunged back into the depths. But there was no time to revel in his victory. From the depths, more monsters emerged, smaller but swarming like a cloud of locusts, their teeth bared and eyes ablaze with fury. Shin gritted his teeth. At a time like this, only one thought settled in his mind: Northern. And focusing on that single thought fueled his resolve with adrenaline. He spun, a whirlwind of dark energy and ferocity, his sword carving through the air. Each strike summoned shadows that danced around him, striking down the approaching horde. Form 3, Nighthawk. A flurry of raven-like silhouettes shot from his blade, each one piercing through the monsters, leaving trails of darkness in their wake. The sea churned with the chaos of battle, the cries of the creatures echoing against the sky. With each slash, each swing of his sword, Shin smartly carved the path towards his son, mercilessly destroying the monsters with intense focus, revealing all his cards. He was fighting with a different intensity than he usually would. The air that surrounded him was stern and grim. Soon, a squad of protectors began to reach the seashore. Some of them paused and stared in awe as they watched Shin single-handedly cleave a storm of monsters while in the water. The water was at his knee level, which should even slow his movement to a reasonable extent. However, Shin did not look bothered or slowed. Perhaps he was slowed, which was why it was possible for them to see his ominously beautiful sword art. One of them had even said, "I have never seen him so serious. He's amazing." Shin had been known during his first and now second service on the border as an extremely jovial person. While the squad captains felt there was a secretive air around him, the notion was always dismissed most of the time because he was really too stupid. Which was why seeing him now had several soldiers stuck in a fog of their own minds, wondering, is this really Shin? A large-scaled reptile surged toward Shin, its massive form slicing through the water with terrifying speed. As it reached, it unleashed a deafening roar that echoed across the sea, sending a palpable shiver through the air. Its enormous maw opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth glistening like sharpened obsidian, poised to engulf him whole. They all froze in fear while Shin's instincts had immediately kicked in. He could see the monstrous jaws descending, a shadow eclipsing the sun. Time seemed to slow as he calculated his next move. Form 4, Abyssal Strike, he shouted, channeling his energy into his blade. The dark aura surrounding him intensified, swirling like a storm as he prepared to meet the monster's onslaught. As it lunged, Shin pivoted on his heel, the water splashing as he dodged to the side with a grace that belied his size. He felt the rush of water as the monster's jaws snapped shut mere inches from him, the force creating a tidal wave that crashed around him. Seizing the moment, he spun back toward the beast, his sword glinting with dark energy. With a powerful leap, he launched himself off the surface of the water, aiming directly for the monster's exposed back. Raven's Embrace. He descended like a meteor, his blade aimed for the thick, armored scales. The moment his sword connected, a shockwave rippled through the air, and the monster howled in pain, its body writhing beneath him. But it was relentless, thrashed wildly, trying to throw him off. Giant fins whipped through the water, creating whirlpools that threatened to drag him under. Shin gritted his teeth, anchoring himself with sheer willpower. With a surge of determination, he unleashed a series of rapid strikes, each blow resonating with dark essence. The monster recoiled, its scales cracking under the relentless assault. while the others watched him doggedly deal with the monster. Such battle strength, composure, and intelligence. His skills spoke for him. This was definitely no battle amateur. Shin was obviously a legend. Shin let out a guttural roar, channeling all his power into one final attack. He rose high into the air, the dark aura coalescing around him, forming a massive raven that mirrored his movements. Dark Raven's Fury. He descended with blinding speed, the raven's form striking at the heart of the monster. The impact sent a shockwave rippling across the sea and the shore. The protectors had to shield themselves from the waves of the sea and intense breeze as the creature let out a final, agonized roar before sinking back beneath the waves, defeated. As silence fell over the battlefield, Shin landed gracefully on the water, breathing heavily. He turned to continue on the path of the water, but suddenly noticed through the eyes of the raven that the boy fighting in the water was gone. Damn it! I was too focused, I didn't see. He gritted his teeth in pain. He tried controlling the raven to search around but suddenly froze. Heartbeats later, trembling, Shin turned to his back, towards the shore of the sea. 3 meters away from him, a white-haired boy with sparkling, beautiful blue eyes was walking towards him with a pale smile. Fath! Northern did not get to complete the word before Shin rushed forward and pulled him into his warm embrace, despite the cold air. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes, a tear dropping from his left eye. I'm back, Dad. Shin hugged even tighter, pressing his lips as he lingered for more than a moment, after which he responded with a trembling voice. Welcome back. Chapter 469. Brewing Riot Part 1. Shin stood by the doorway in the quite broad but dark hallway of the border quarters. It was an emergency shelter that was prepared for the survivors that showed up at the seashore until they were sent to the Central Plains. He didn't know the details, but the commander and higher authorities were working on certain formalities. Just like him and the guy that met his sister after so long, there were several families that had been looking for their sons or daughters. This petition over the months had caused an uproar, subtly stirring a discord, one that should have erupted years ago. But of course, it was the former principal academy that was at the end of these strange happenings. And he is nowhere to be found. The academy principal had taken to the media to speak on how he had known nothing about it. Several families didn't buy it, but in the end, the whole issue just kept brewing on a lower level than expected. Either the families had something stopping them from going nuts on the academy, or they also, like him, had realized that there is almost nothing they can do to the academy on their own. Hence, everything has sort of been under a subtle control. And now that they were back, the protectors were required to go through certain formalities through the governments, which would further inform them of the next course of action. Of course, if Shin wanted to be a part of this whole formality process and know what exactly they were doing, it wouldn't prove to be a difficult matter. He was one of the most respected old protectors here whose skills hadn't died down a bit even after over a decade of being away. Well, they did see for themselves. Shin looked up, a tensed and sad frown laying upon his light, sharp brows. His face was rough, stubbles of beard consuming his chin and jaw. He looked like he had been doing nothing but fighting monsters for a while now. His face carried an ambience of concerning emptiness. A step from the right side of the hall echoed as it drew closer to him. Shin, you should get some rest. Unseen, a brown-haired man with relaxed facial features, said to Shin as he approached. Shin looked at him indifferently for a moment and averted his gaze. He lingered for a moment before speaking. You don't understand, Anes. You don't understand. Unseen frowned a little bit, staring at Shin before he responded with a stern tone. Yes, indeed, I don't understand. But what I do understand is that it's been over 15 hours, and you have been standing here since the medic attended to him. Shin sighed. All right, I will rest. Let me just stay a bit more and guard him. Okay? Unseen shook his head in disagreement. Like I don't know you, sir? No, I want you to go get some rest now. He observed Shin's demeanor for a moment and added after a sigh. Okay, how about I guard him instead while you rest your body? Then you can come back after you have fully rested. Shin stared at Unseen, a little puzzled and hesitant. He opened his mouth a little bit, But there's really no need for you to, and I am fine. Really. The brown-haired man, with a hearty smile on his easygoing face, nodded his head and reinforced his request to Shin. Please, Shin, let me do this for you. Many of us owe our lives to you. I can't count how many times in the last 6 months that you have saved mine or many others' lives. We'd do anything for you. Shin gave him a prolonged gaze, and the smile on his face did not waver, showing that he was seriously going to keep insisting. They were probably going to keep going in circles if Shin did not give in. With a sigh, "All right, okay, I'll go get some rest. Please, the moment he wakes up, send a message to me," Shin's voice reinforced. And Scene smiled and nodded. Yes, I've got you. Please get some rest. All is fine on this end." Shin walked purposefully out of the hallway, almost as if he was in a hurry to go to sleep and wake up. There was so much on his mind. His shoulders and feet felt heavy, his muscles ached. It had been a very long while since he decided to use his family sword art. And he did it without hesitation too. Shin looked down for a moment. A lot was obviously on his mind even as he walked out of the building, treading the snow to the next block where the protectors were cramped in temporarily. But before he entered the building, a young protector jogged towards him and stopped with a salute, placing his left hand on his chest alongside a slight raise and return of his right leg. Shin turned, managing a small but unintentionally pale smile. "How may I help, Sergeant Haven't?" The young protector went silent, surprised by how Shin remembered his name. Belatedly remembering that he had come here to deliver something, he started to talk but stuttered his first few words. Sir, teeth the sea calm. Commander has requested your presence." Just as I suspected. The moment he saw the guy coming, he had in fact thought that the commander was probably the one calling him. Because no one around here bothers him. And at times when the commander wanted him around, he would personally come to his quarters to drink and talk. They were old friends from over a decade ago, after all. Shin swallowed and said politely, "Okay, lead the way, Sergeant." The sergeant noticed that Shin had a stern face today. Usually he was always jovial and walking with a smile, making it hard for people to really tell what was going on in his mind. "He looks like he is always happy, but squad captain said he had lost his son too," the sergeant thought as he escorted Shin to another block. It was a much bigger fortress of metal, thrown to the rightward edge of the wall. A place that buzzed with military activities, situated with several offices, artilleries, and training halls. After a while, Shin and Sergeant Haven't entered the building. Chapter 470. Brewing Riot, Part 2. Immediately as Shin entered the metal fortress, his ears were greeted by the clanging of metal and the rhythmic sound of drills, mingling with the distant thud of artillery testing and the sharp bark of orders. The structure itself loomed large, an intimidating monolith of steel and concrete, its exterior marked by the relentless pace of military efficiency. The air inside was filled with the tang of oil and metal, punctuated by the whirring of machines and the distant rumble of tanks rolling across the yard. The interior was a hive of activity. Protectors in uniform moved with purpose, their boots echoing on the polished floors. Offices lined the long corridors, each door marked with the rank and title of the occupants within. The walls were bare, save for the occasional motivational poster or a map detailing current or past sea subjugation operations. Shin passed by a bustling mess hall, filled with the clatter of trays and the low hum of conversation, and a training hall where recruit protectors were put through their paces, sweat and shouts filling the air. The heart of the fortress was the commander's meeting room, set deep within the structure, away from the noise and distractions. As Shin neared it, the atmosphere grew more subdued, the chatter of the troops giving way to the quiet efficiency of the officers. The room itself was guarded by a pair of imposing protectors, their presence a clear reminder of the importance of what lay beyond. They recognized and placed their hands on their chest as Shin approached. Shin responded with his right hand on his chest, after which they pushed the heavy steel door open for him. This was not his first time in the commander's office, but every time he stepped into the place, the air of authority and command was ever domineering. The room was spacious but stark, dominated by a long, polished metal table that reflected the cool, harsh light from the overhead lamps. Around the table, high-backed chairs were arranged in a precise, orderly manner, each one tailored to the rank of the officer it hosted. Right now, they were filled with unfamiliar faces, most of which were young and roughened. The returnees? Shin had to take a brief pause at the shock of the people inside the commander's office. At the far end of the room, a large digital screen that usually displayed tactical maps was blank white. The commander looked at Shin from his seat at the head of the table and welcomed him with a warm smile, quite befitting of his wrinkled face. "Shin, we were waiting for you. Please have a seat." Before Shin could have a seat, someone suddenly rushed to him before any of the soldiers could react. The frail-looking, black-haired boy with timid eyes bowed 90 degrees to Shin, shouting his greetings. "I heard you are Northern's father. Nice to meet you, sir. I am Northern's friend. My name is Ellis, and I am the only friend he has. Please let no one else deceive you. I am the only friend Northern has." He was almost frowning at the end of his statement. Shin, confused and not exactly sure how to respond to this, let out an awkward smile. "Oh, nice to meet you, Ellis. Thank you for being Northern's friend." "And me too." Shin's eyes drifted to the dark-skinned lady that suddenly shot up from her seat. "We were not close enough to be called friends, but I really respect him." Shin raised a brow. "Respect? Northern." Annette smiled proudly and also looked into his eyes, not standing up though. "Well, you did raise him to be a real pain in the ass, but I can tell he grew up with lots of love from his parents. His resilience and determination to come back to his mother and father is what brought us this far, of course. Not only his." Her voice went a little bit somber. Shin didn't know how to take this. A lot of emotions were mixing up inside of him. His resilience and determination to come back to his mother and father. That part especially rang in his head and made his chest churn with heartbreak. "Your son is a strong man," the old man amongst them said with a small nod of approval. The atmosphere in the room seemed really elated as they all sang praises of his son. And Shin just found it unbelievable. His mind couldn't help but question what exactly Northern had done, and his heart broke at every word that concerned his mother. Finally, the commander's voice broke in. "Please, we will love to save time. I have called Shin because while he might not be a sanctioned officer, he is as important as every officer seated at this table. Does anyone have an objection to his presence?" The officers all seated on the left side of the table shook their heads. Then the commander looked at Shin and with a face gesture, presented him the single seat at the end of the officers' row. Shin settled down, calmly observing every other person in the room. The returnees were seated opposite the officers. Some were even standing behind. They looked different, barbaric if he'd say, but there was an undoubtable air of power and intelligence wafting across every single one of them. Some more obvious than others. He could already instantly make out the key figures. The brunette-haired lady, the vermilion-haired lady, the old man, the green-haired boy, the blonde-haired boy too. His thoughts trailed away but suddenly came back. The old man, I've seen him before. He narrowed his eyes for a second. The commander's voice interrupted before Shin could think any further. "We were talking about some certain things. They have shared their experiences in brief as to how they ended up on the Dark Continent, and I have compiled a detailed report to the government. The government themselves say they will start a comprehensive investigation of what this matter truly is about, and no one will be spared." The commander paused, riding an authoritative look across everyone in the room before he continued. "But today I have arranged this meeting so that we together as the protectors of the border can make a decision as one, as regards the optimal route of safety for these guys." Annette's voice interrupted. She started with a soft scoff then said, "Not to be rude or anything, Commander. It is quite naive of you to say optimal route of safety for us, who have spent the past few months, perhaps years, in the darkest heart of monster and rift-infested continent." Chapter 471. Brewing Riot, Part 3. The room went dead silent immediately after Annette spoke. She leaned back in her chair and unapologetically added, "I'm not sorry that I sound cocky. It is just the naked truth. I understand that you guys wish to proceed with our best interest at heart. But you see, we really do not care about all of that. The commander stared blankly at her for a moment. It was incredibly difficult to tell what he was thinking, whether he was pissed off by her tone of speech, or he simply found it amusing. Either way, a ghostly smile was stuck on his face. Gilbert also added after Annette. What Annette is saying is true. She was a master in the Central Plains. In fact, she had hit a wall with the growing dangers of rifts, and the recent one had just taken her eyes. She was very skeptical of going back into rifts, which was why I invited her to be a temporary instructor at the public academy. Frankly speaking, Annette was formidable already, a force of strength to reckon with. Then we entered the Dark Continent. He paused to breathe before continuing. Seated before you right now, Annette is a sage. And more than being a sage, the amount of fortitude that this disaster has built in us is what makes us first the strongest set of drifters that will exist in this era. The commander glanced at Gilbert, surprised. He wanted to talk but suppressed it, diving first into his thoughts. Suddenly, a voice rose from the officers with furious intensity. How insolent of you to lie before the commander in such a manner. A lie? Gilbert inquired rhetorically. He chuckled dismissively and said, No, sir. While I may be sorry for our tone and manner of speech, this isn't a lie. The commander placed his hands on the table, locking his fingers. He turned his head to Gilbert and finally spoke. It is no news that once one advances to become a master, proceeding forward becomes incredibly hard. First of all, one needed to challenge rifts for a definite and much quicker soul advancement. And it is no news that getting a rift is hard. The appearance rate of rifts has slowed. No common person can just decide to enter the already available ones or even the ones that manage to appear. Government and kingdoms claim all territories, making it difficult for drifters of mundane status to enter. He looked at them seriously as he continued. Let's even say one does get access to a rift, and eventually becomes a savant. The journey becomes much harder. It's estimated if a master is challenging between Tier 1 and Tier 3 rifts every day, it'll take 2 years for them to become a savant. He went silent for a couple of beats, intensely looking at Gilbert, Annette, and the others. And now, you claim that this lady has achieved that in just the space of 13 months? I'm sorry, you present quite a difficult argument to believe. It makes no sense. Annette nodded. If I was in your shoes, I'd say the same thing. I only just became a sage recently, after all. She smirked. We are not asking that you believe us. We are saying for your good not to underestimate us. Gilbert contributed. Annette moved her eyes to Shin, who was seated towards the end. She spent almost a second before adding, most especially the white-haired kid. He's a vicious monster. Once again, Shin found himself in a pool of confusing questions, not even sure what to expect or what his son could have become. The commander observed both spokespersons in the room, nodded peacefully and said, All right, I will keep in mind your warning. He opened a couple of filed papers in front of him as he started the subject of discussion as to why they are gathered here. We compiled the brief testimonies received by you all, and they have demanded that you guys should be sent secretly to the base. After bringing out the paper, he looked at all of them, saying, I am not even supposed to be having this conversation with all of you. All I was supposed to do was probably put you all in an automated chariot that looks to be a cargo transporter and deliver you all to the government. And Devon knows what the heck they will do or demand from you lot. But you all have gone through your fair share of suffering. I don't know, I can't even imagine what it would have been like, which is why I don't think I should be involving myself anyway in this. The government is sounding shady, and I don't want to be an agent of hate to any of you. Gilbert looked at the commander and commented, You are a good man. He let out a chuckle. Please do not overestimate me. He looked towards Shin. I'm only doing this for my friend whom I owe my life. 7 months ago, you came to the border to be a protector again. You said you needed no pay, you needed no official sanction. You just want to be here when your son returns from the Dark Continent. You fought furiously to protect every protector here. Shin, you were our own protector. Although I know about your selfless and crude attempt to sail away on the surface of the ocean with rescue boats, which would have caused your death, which was why I put heavy security on them. But I wasn't blind to your suffering. I don't know what happened to your family. I have never seen you this broken. Damn. You were the highlight of this border back in the days. A clown that made our lives here less difficult with his jokes. Shin chuckled awkwardly. I would rather die than transport your son to those distrustful flatfoots. The commander then glanced around at everyone. And if I'll be doing Shin this favor, that means I'll be doing all of you the same favor. He sighed before continuing. We have very limited ways to help you, and we advise that you all do not travel together. We will report to the government that you all overpowered the entire base and fled. Wouldn't that cause problems for you? Gilbert asked in concern. You need not worry about that. Something phenomenal has happened. Your return will break the continent. The government knows this too, which is why they are trying to secure you guys. We will be the least they can afford to worry about. Besides, I have a feeling the use of us protectors is nearing an end. He looked at his officers. Does anyone have an objection to what I just said? They all shook their heads, composed with stark respect for their commander. Shin? He called. Shin immediately got up, still surprised and touched by all the commander had said. He saluted with all his heart and bowed deeply, his voice quaking as he said, Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I am indebted to you. The commander smiled in satisfaction, leaning back in his chair as he replied, Don't be indebted to us, Shin. This is every one of us collectively paying our debts to you. So take your son and fix your family. Chapter 472. The Birth of the Strongest Master, Part 1. Northern, after a long, satisfying sleep, opened his eyes. All his body felt numb but in a good way. He stretched with a stifled groan and then sat back in the bed, closing his eyes for a moment as he observed his environment. His spatial awareness had grown significantly since the last evolution of Soul Eyes, making it become spectrovision. Northern could now become increasingly aware of an environment up to 1,000 meters. From the number of structures to the length of the metallic wall that shielded the borders from the sea and its monsters, to the point where the snow stopped, mysteriously giving way to the tropical forest that lay beyond. He could pinpoint detail to detail every single animate and inanimate thing all around him. And because he could do so, he could also tell that none of them posed a significant threat to him. Almost by instinct, he had used his spatial awareness to determine that fact. If there was a person that he needed to be worried about, he wanted to make sure he had a way to deal with it before proceeding to step out of this place. After he had confirmed that he was fine, all of them were more or less weaker than he was regardless of their soul ranks, comrades of the Dark Continent included. Northern summoned his profile and inspected how much he had gained from the sea expedition. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, Nameless, Superscript 3. Attributes, Formless, Child of Void, Limitless Void, Vestige of Chaos, Chaos Eyes, Chaos Thread, Flames of Chaos, Seed of Void. Soul Rank, Nomad. Void Summons, 6/100. Talent Fragments, 2988/3000. Copied Talents, 2/3. Own Talents, 3. Attribute Abilities, Active/Passive. August 11th. Owned Items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Death Glare, and 11 others. Northern looked down at the number of talent fragments he had gained. I'm so close to becoming a master. He didn't need to think too much about it. He closed his eyes and dove into the limitless void with his body. Getting there, he immediately called Night Terror and Black Mamba, who just flew to his front from dark corners. They had sustained a significant amount of injuries but were healing fast. Northern observed both his best summons for a while. Then he averted his eyes and chanted 2 words. Multiple cloning. Immediately, over 100 clones appeared, filling the center space of the Void Palace. Northern then looked at Night Terror and Black Mamba as he commanded. I will create a rift above the water. I want you to lead these clones outside. All the monsters we managed to kill, They must harvest all the cores while you two fight till I ask you to stop. Soul summons absorbed soul to grow. When they become void summons, they grow a vivid connection to Northern and become more interwoven with the void. They still need souls to grow, but just like Northern's coreless soul had the ability to break down the talents of slain targets into fragments for his own growth. They also could break down talents of slain targets as fragments for their master's soul. Hence the reason that Northern had given them this task. I should be able to become a master before stepping outside that room. Northern swiped his hand down on the space in front of him. It was as if he was tearing the space with dimensional scissors. Blackness rippled in the depth of the torn fabric of space. Without hesitation, Night Terror and Black Mamba led the clones into the rift and fell right in the middle of the ocean. While Northern withdrew himself out of the ocean and waited for his talent fragments to get full. He looked at his profile again while doing so, and belatedly observed that he had left one copy talent slot unoccupied. At that point, Northern thought of sending one of the Void Shadows to observe, but he thought about the cost of the talent too. Copying a Paragon's talent really should be enough consolation for me. I have 7 talent abilities. Each one is extremely overpowered. I haven't even begun to explore the abilities of my true name, which I suspect is a different pattern of strength from what I have represented so far. Northern continued to stare down on the panel while his thoughts proceeded. While I feel tempted to pardon myself and let this go, I don't want this to become a habit. I need to build a structure for talent consumption. My soul growth will obviously take time, but I can at least compensate for that with talent evolution. His thoughts went silent as he dove deeper for a second, utterly confused about how to go about it. Let's try to break down my need for talent fragments first, in the order of their importance. Northern used his fingers as he continued. Number 1 is soul growth. I need an enormous amount of talent fragments for that. Soul growth is the most important and requires more talent fragments. The next is copying talents. That one is a little bit versatile and depends heavily on the kind of talent I'm copying. But it's also very important because I need to fill the slots before progressing to the next rank. The amount of talent fragments at least shouldn't be concerning, except I'm shooting for extremely high ones, which I believe I'll have to specially save for. He tapped his forehead with his index finger as he continued to think. Next will be the evolution of my own talents, which can prove to be the most daunting of tasks. It might not be as expensive, but I have to make decisions based on the path of strength that I want to take. As clear as I make it sound, I have no idea what to do in that regard. Northern drove all his hands into his hair in frustration and lowered for a minute. This situation made him remember how helpless he was when he first entered the Dark Continent. That capacious rift. But he had come a long way from that time, had progressed tremendously from that walker that he was. Now on the verge of becoming a master. His pride was not even in the progression in rank but rather in his repertoire of abilities. He was a nomad and he stood his ground against a paragon. They were almost revered as gods. And he fought one and survived. That alone was enough achievement for his name to be carved in the Hall of Fame of his continent. If his country heard, they'd give him nobility on a platter of gold, perhaps beg him to become a duke even. The next daunting task is the growth of my void summons and converting soul summons to void summons. Chapter 473. The Birth of the Strongest Master, Part 2. Northern, as he was about to deliberate on his next course of planning, suddenly paused. His expression was stiff, his face contorting like he had just found out he had eaten something bad. Northern's brows furrowed together in a detrimental realization of what had come for him. He knew what this was. Soul-wrenching transformation. I dread it. His talent was complete and he was due. The system appeared before his eyes, confirming his thoughts. You have reached 3,000 talent fragments. Your soul is evolving. Rumble. The entire room that Northern was staying in began to crack. Northern quickly glanced up, worried as to why the entire building suddenly felt like it was being threatened, and coincidentally at a moment when he was going to be vulnerable. He tried to escape physically into the limitless void, but it was futile. He wouldn't move. It was like the entry point to the limitless void was suddenly unstable. Each time he tried, his body glitched, and soon he gave up, falling to his knees as pain traveled across his entire body. His muscles felt like they were being beaten and battered by an iron rod. His bones ached like they were forcibly stretching to something else. In a matter of minutes, Northern began to sweat. Hell! This is hell! He stifled his pain, groaned, and cried internally as the pain of evolution continued. Shin stood up from his single bed. He had managed to get a few hours rest after the meeting with the commander, but there were a couple of things that still bothered him heavily. Most of which had to do with the kind of person Northern had become. After the meeting, several of the returnees came to him, still thanking him for raising Northern. He hadn't really considered it as a great deed. In fact, Northern was so brilliant and easily digested knowledge at a young age that they deliberately hid a lot from him due to the fear of a bothersome fate. A decision Aisha had made, perhaps out of selfishness. Because Northern's true identity bothered her so much in the days of their beginning with him. Shin at a point felt like she was trying to make him hers completely. He was a sauce that sweetened their lives, and raising him had indeed been an act of pride. At the same time, it is Northern, a reckless, sometimes dumb kid that somehow has taken after him. Shin dreaded that part of his personality. Northern was like a mixture of both of them, sometimes innocently naive and dumb like him, other times kind-hearted and mean like his mother. But overall, he felt like the praises were too good to be real. I guess I will know when I meet him. A short-lived chuckle creased his tired face. After which he stood up, about to leave his room when he suddenly stopped with squinted eyes. He looked around the ceiling of his quarters. There was a subtle vibration that could go unnoticed but not with the likes of him around. He closed his eyes and slowly raised his feet from the ground a little bit, then placed them on the ground again. He frowned at that moment and pushed the door open, brisking through the passageway. Protectors were here and there in casual clothing, doing their daily mundane chores. The passageway was wide, and people had segments of space that they filled with their personal materials, adding a rural ambience to the space. Each time Shin passed, the ones that were outside would stand straight in composure. It was a way to greet a respected one when they were not in uniform. Shin walked past hurriedly with a frown on his face. He wasn't exactly puzzled as to why they were not noticing the soft tremble of the ground. The truth was that the kinds of drifters that were sent to the border to be protectors were the kind that had been rendered useless by their families. Some even used it as a means of punishment for their child. That was Shin's case, in fact. Of course, along the line he made a life for himself in this place. They were good. With enough guidance and training, they were useful in battle, but when true danger lurked, it was always up to the captains and officers to save the day. The others were basically useless. Shin finally reached outside the building. He stopped and looked down at his feet. His eyes narrowed. The vibration was still there, still subtle. What is wrong? He wondered. He then raised his head to examine his surroundings, lastly setting his eyes on the building structure that had been designated to the returnees. Shin observed lights within the dark windows of the hall, which he suspected as someone or a group of people deliberately putting on the crystal-generated illumination that was installed in the building. Did they also notice? If they did, then they certainly are no joke. Because certainly none of the protectors have so far. Shin breathed for a second and then proceeded to go to the building, mostly worried because his son was there. As Shin brisked towards the building, getting to half the distance between that building and the one he was coming from, a tremendous explosion suddenly erupted, drowning the entire atmosphere in a thunderous roar. The ground shook violently, and the metal walls of the building were being ripped apart by the mere force of the explosion. Shin had been sent tumbling by the force of the explosion even though he was quite far from it. He stood up in a hurry, eyes widened and set upon the building in front. His face slowly broke apart at the quick realization that Northern was in that building. Without a thought, he blitzed forward, recklessly forcing his way through the violent gale of metals. Smaller pieces of metal flew across him, opening small tears all over his skin, as he was wearing only a shirt-necked shirt and his uniform pants and boots. He didn't care about the injuries and just pushed himself forward, groaning. The gale was like an invisible wall. Not only was it stubbornly preventing Shin from getting in, but it had also viciously sent every single drifter in the building out by a certain distance all around it, while the structure of metal was slowly being ripped apart by it. Shin looked around and could see as several of them flew out of the building like weightless dolls. And then he saw Annette scream as she saved herself from the throw, twirling in the air and landing, her feet ablaze with flames. She screamed as her feet touched the ground. "It's Northern. Something is happening to him." Chapter 474. The Birth of the Strongest Master, Part 3. As Shin heard Annette, his mind fell into ruin. He glared directly at the crumbling building. The effect of the gale was so powerful that a deafening sound of metal being ripped apart reverberated in the night sky. They all were helpless before the incident. The more they tried to bludgeon their way into the building, the more deranged the gale was. It was an impervious wall of defense. Shin stubbornly threw himself into the building, but the raging air nonchalantly stoned him out before he could even make it a single step. More protectors arrived as time went on, but the situation did not seem to be any better. Outside was filled with all the protectors and returnees, faced by a situation that they were totally helpless about. At least they could tell that this wasn't just any kind of gale. Annette had informed them that something had to be going on with Northern. Since they couldn't break in and didn't want to be extreme with how they broke in because Northern was inside, they all had to wait. However, that wait had to be the most impatient wait Shin had ever experienced. Northern had no idea what was happening outside, but for sure he knew that something was going on. At the point where it felt like insubstantial materials of his soul were being drawn out by a strange force, the building around him started to shake heavily. The timing was so perfect that Northern in his subconscious quickly knew that whatever was going on with him inside was affecting his surroundings, which made him utterly worried. But he had so much to worry about already. The pain in the entirety of his body was not getting any better. It was so worse that he was beginning to vomit. His legs were weak, so were his hands. In addition, his head was like parchments of his skull were being forcibly removed and refixed again. At some point, he became a pitiful mess, passing out in his own vomit. While he was conscious, his body had collapsed. All his nervous system had been temporarily disrupted. He was practically a living corpse. Finally, after a couple of gruesome minutes, "Congratulations! You have become a master. Several changes have been made to your body. Your body has transcended the limit of humanity and could be compared with that of an ethereal being. Wasn't that the case before?" Northern was angry but was too tired from all the pain. Even his thinking felt dragged out. The system continued without a care about his thoughts. "Your soul has taken a more definite shape. Your bond with the void has been strengthened. Attributes: Child of Void has merged with Seed of Void. The Seed of Void has reached the imbibition stage of development. At the imbibition state, the Seed of Origin will gain 3 abilities: Void Sense, Void Aura, Shadow Step. Void Sense, passive. You can perceive the nothingness in all things. Your senses are heightened to detect areas of entropy or decay, and you can sense when life, light, or energy is draining from your surroundings. Your presence subtly drains life from nearby flora and fauna, leaving withered plants in your wake. Void Aura, passive. A faint aura of darkness surrounds you, making the air colder and heavier around you. People near you feel an inexplicable sense of dread or emptiness. This aura grows stronger as your seed grows. Shadow Step. You can now move between shadows or areas of darkness with greater ease. While it's not yet full teleportation, you can blur your form and move at unnatural speeds when stepping from one shadow to the next. Northern's mind was not entirely blank as the system rambled on both in words and sound. He was too tired to keep his focus, but he was clearly taking notes. Certain changes are occurring. Chaos is causing your body to absorb some talent abilities. Talent abilities will be lost after absorption. Formless is taking effect in the root of your body. A change is occurring in your genetics. A change is occurring in your blood. A change is occurring in your bones. A change is occurring in your muscles. A change is occurring in your organs. Chaos eyes is fusing with eyes of intent. At that point was the peak suffering that Northern experienced, going totally blind. Everything and everywhere was shrouded in pitch darkness. A kind of darkness he had never even experienced when he slept. He felt so cold and alone. At the same time, there was a dreadful sense of familiarity. Even though he was blind, he could still sense his surroundings and tell what was what. Of course, the violent and impregnable gale made it very hard for even him to detect the outer part of the incident. The system continued. Due to Formless, your body has been affected by the void. You have gained the body of a master. However, Formless and the void have altered it slightly, causing it to gain some coherent features. Just as the system spoke, Northern's skin became paler than usual, almost as if he had been drained of all vitality. His blue eyes, once vibrant, darkened, reflecting a hollow depth, and faint black lines, like cracks or tendrils, appeared under his skin, representing the void's initial influence. Your endurance and stamina have increased, allowing you to survive extreme conditions such as freezing temperatures or lack of oxygen for longer periods. Your reflexes have been sharpened, but your body still maintains its human fragility. Formless has been integrated into your genes. You have become a true demon of adaptation. You have successfully become a master. Your own talents have unlocked one more ability each. Copied talents have been transferred to own talents. You have one unused slot on copied talents. Unused slot costs 1,000 talent fragments. You have gained plus 1,000 talent fragments. You have become a master. Your soul has entered a stage of maturity. This stage is beginning to affect the limitless void. The limitless void is slowly progressing to become a reality that might be able to weave its own space. All your soul summons and void summons are going through a stage of maturity following your own soul. The bond between you and your soul/void summons can never be detached. No matter what, Northern felt like the system was taking forever as it rambled on. He was still blind, and now more than ever he wanted his sight back. Chapter 475. The Birth of the Strongest Master, Part 4. After a while, the pain subsided. The violent and impregnable gale of wind still stood strong, protecting Northern from the outside and the outside from Northern. He sat down cross-legged. His eyes closed while he patiently waited for his sight to return. He had tried to enter into the limitless void, but that had proved to be another futile task. This time his body didn't even glitch. There was no slight movement. This caused him to powerlessly sit in the room for a while, internally scrutinizing himself. As the system had notified, a lot had changed about him, even many things that could be seen in his physical appearance, although he was yet to see himself. He continually sat there, his arms folded as he waited for whatever was going on to finish happening. Northern knew that the main reason why he couldn't access the limitless void was because of the change that was happening to it due to his soul maturity. Limitless void never had a reality of its own. It resided in his soul and existed as an immaterial world. He had several times silently considered manifesting it in actual reality, but it was an impossible feat. As a matter of fact, he didn't think it was possible to bring a belonging of the limitless void to the actual reality without providing a material body for it. It was an essential reason as to why he needed his clones before he could bring out the soul summons. Which was why this news felt kind of good. Northern was speculating that the change that is being wrought in the limitless void might cause the soul summon to get a body of some sort. And it might not happen. It's all speculation either way. He raised his head up a little bit. His eyes were closed, but it was like he was observing the violent gale beyond. I guess the void force is acting out like that because I'm in a vulnerable state. Moreover, my soul maturity should be affecting it too. Void force was a concept that was tied to the limitless void. The void force was certainly deemed to go through a change as the limitless void was going through its own change. I didn't know becoming a master was going to be so tasking and bothersome. And I guess it'll be more bothersome than this when I become an ascendant. Northern was well aware that these were the core stages of soul maturity. Their effect on him was bound to be magnanimous, both in pain and strength. It didn't mean that the other ranks were going to be an easy bridge to cross though. He sighed and then finally noticed the calm in his raging soul. It's done. As he said that, the void force rampaging outside suddenly erupted, an invisible wall that erupted straight into the sky. The invisibility of the wall became somewhat apparent. It was like a translucent surface. Everyone outside laid their eyes on it, having no idea what it was. The limitless void surrounded the building in a large circle. It was like a frozen, translucent wall of defense. Shin raised his head in dread as he tried to make sense of what it was. His face was equally as pale as every other person's face was. The entity was so magnifying, intimidating, and divine. Annette, where she stood, stared with a slight frown etched on her brows. She lowered her head to look at the building. Then she sensed something that made her mutter. Northern is just becoming a master. As she muttered the words, Ellis and Vita, who were standing around her, heard clearly. Vita's face contorted in terror. No way! Her lips trembled in fact. She herself had seen the things Northern could do, and she was certain that he either was a master or a savant. If he was a sage, she wouldn't even be surprised. But he was just becoming a master. This was someone she had subconsciously been chasing since day one. Someone she wanted to be like. But in reality, she seniored him in soul rank all the while. At that moment of terrible and unfair realization, she felt her hopes of ever becoming strong enough to ask him for a duel shatter. Ellis gulped and stared with his eyes blazing with flames of different emotions. Respect, hope, happiness, fear. Finally, the void force coalesced, withdrawing into the building. It formed an invisible frame over Northern and soon disappeared. Then the flying debris, which had initially stagnated in the air, all fell to the ground, singing a torturous metallic song. Immediately, Shin shot forward, rushing into the building and cutting through the narrow halls. The walls were scraped off. Crude marks marred their surface. It was a wonder how the structure had managed to maintain its foundation despite the powerful force of destruction that surrounded it. Of course, the metallic body of the exterior was more than a mess. Northern was already walking by the time his father cut to the narrow hall that led to his room. He paused his steps and looked up at his father. Shin, who had cut the corner hurriedly, came to an abrupt pause. He sensed a death threat in the narrow hall, one that caused him to immediately stop and contemplate going forward. Then he saw a white-haired, sickly-looking kid that looked at him and slowly continued to walk forward with his eyes closed. Shin frowned. The closer Northern got, the faster his heart beat. He couldn't even pinpoint where the fear was coming from, but it made his pores rise, chills ran down his spine, and his heart felt like it had dropped to his stomach. As Northern came closer, he took a step back, only realizing that he had after his foot touched the ground. Then he thought painfully, am I scared of my own son right now? Shin was disappointed in himself. At the same time, he subconsciously tried to present to himself a palatable argument. There was an air around Northern as he came closer that suddenly felt chilly, and equally, Shin's body suddenly felt heavier than usual. Northern looked at his father with a smile and said, I'm sorry for worrying you. It seems my soul progression was a lot of hassle. I didn't think it would be. Chapter 476. The Drive to Kill Ruffsburg. After hearing the words, Shin froze for a few seconds, not entirely sure how to respond. His mind ran helter-skelter. My son is a master. He has caught up with me in soul rank. Damn, that woman wasn't overselling what she said during the meeting. Shin paled as the seconds went by. He was at least distracted from the shrewd coldness that Northern exuded. Are you there, father? Despite already knowing, Northern inquired. Shin raised his head to look at Northern, a slight frown falling upon his face. What? You can't. Northern smiled and took the statement out of Shin's mouth with ease. Yes, I can't see. I have temporarily been rendered blind. Sucks, but I'm sure I'll gain sight soon. But until then, I think I'll need you. Shin rushed to the opportunity, hurriedly responding, Of course, son. You should need me. He cautiously neared Northern and took his hands. Shin reflexively dropped Northern's hand, looking at him with a puzzled frown. What is wrong? Northern asked, worried at how his father had reacted just now. Your temperature is very cold. Very, very cold, Shin emphasized. Northern's expression became confused despite his closed eyes. It has something to do with my new body, definitely, he said to Shin. I'm not sure what it is for now. I can only hope I regain my eyesight as fast as possible. Shin took his hand, silent about its coldness since he was expecting it this time around. With his help and guidance, Northern made it out of the building. As they came out, Annette, Ellis, and Vita rushed to them, showering him with all kinds of questions. Meanwhile, Helena stood afar, with Zephyr beside her. I thought you were quite close with them. Helena glanced at her side and focused on Northern and the people that gathered around him. Well, as you said, I am more of a Raven person than a Northern person. Zephyr smirked. Do you hate that you are? No, not at all. I did regret some things I said to him, how I treated him. I was rash and judgmental, but Raven had more guts than Northern did. She was courageous in ways that he couldn't be. Call me insane, but she's a leader. Looks to me like you're wishing that you had been a little bit nicer to this Northern at least. Helena rolled her eyes. Aren't you ashamed of yourself anyway? You practically begged to be a part of the last match. Zephyr shrugged. My achievement before earned me an audience, and there is strength in casting pride aside. Why should I be ashamed of being desperate to survive? Helena sighed and turned around. Whatever, she said as she walked away. Over the next couple of days, the border was quiet. A general announcement was made to the returnees at large. One that mainly informed them that they were free to depart the border, on the condition that they should not reveal too much information about each other. After several days, a considerable amount of them had left, and a considerable amount of them was still at the border. A week passed. Many had left, and quite a few were now remaining. Northern had been in special care since he awakened as a master. The medic had been constantly going in and out of his room, which had been switched to a more privileged room in the officers' quarters. Northern oftentimes had nothing to do except sit cross-legged and try to familiarize himself with his body and his body with his environment. But there was little he could do when he was not moving so much and he could not see. His sight for the past 1 week in the border had been completely gone. He had been focusing on trying to recover it or at least discover the reason why it was like that. But so far, so good, there had been no reasonable progress. Another thing that had no reasonable progress was the air between him and Shin. Every time Shin entered to check up on him, it was always awkward. Hey, father. Looking sharp, Shin at a point wanted to beat himself up for a line like that. Looking sharp? It was incredibly difficult to hold a conversation with Northern, and as for Northern, it was always difficult. The air just seemed like it held so much and wanted it untouched. One time he had even asked about his mother, and Shin chuckled palely. And the medics came in before Shin was able to answer. After that, the next time he seemed to be evading the question, which was quite offsetting. But Northern didn't know how to tackle the issue yet. All he wanted to do was get back his sight first. A knock beat his door, distracting him from his thoughts. Northern raised his head slightly and answered, "Come in." The door opened ruggedly, and Annette marched buoyantly into his room. With a nonchalant shift of her foot, she dragged an ornamental stool with curved legs. Then she sat on it and stared at Northern. "So, any progress?" Northern frowned in frustration, lingering before he responded. "Sadly, no." His voice came with a dejected tone. "And you have really had no idea what could be happening?" Northern had told Annette and anyone who knew that he did not know what was happening because he didn't want them to know he had ocular powers. And he wanted to keep it that way. The only suspicion he had was the fact that Chaos Eyes tried to absorb Eyes of Intent. That most likely would have caused some complications. But if he was right, Void had also absorbed talent abilities. "I feel so messed up right now." So much disorganization had happened to him, and he had no idea where to start picking up the pieces. At the same time, he felt like when he gained his sight back, other things would fall in place. Annette looked at him for a few seconds and then spoke. "I came to tell you that I will be leaving tomorrow." Northern looked at her and smiled after a few beats. "Will you be meeting your family after so long?" Annette chuckled immediately. "Family? Really? Did you ever hear such from me?" Northern shrugged. "I wouldn't be surprised if you had a daughter from a one-night stand." Annette narrowed her eyes. "One-night stand? I don't know what that is, but guessing that people get daughters from it, there can't be any good to it." Her voice ceased, and she shook her head dejectedly before continuing. "The one thing I hate the most is childbirth." She took another brief pause, breathing before she continued, her face contorting sternly. "The moment Gilbert, Mew, Au, and I step out of this place, there is a high chance that Ruffsburg will approach us." At the mention of the name, Northern suddenly felt all his calm spirit rise. Simultaneously, he flung his eyes open out of reflex, but to his surprise, the view of the room easily manifested before his sight. Annette reared her head back in shock. She was silent and blinking for a couple of seconds before she commented, "You really must be dying to kill him." Northern's eyes gleamed with primal evil. "You have no idea." Chapter 477. Ocular Abilities. Northern's eyes widened just as he flung them open. After answering Annette, he was slightly shocked. But he also simultaneously understood what had happened with his eyes. It was like something was keeping them inactive the whole time. And he had no idea that was what was happening until the situation forced him to react. It just happened to be that he flipped to the other side when he heard about Ruffsburg. And that strong drive was what he needed to open his eyes. He just didn't have an idea because he was focusing on the wrong thing the entire time, waiting for the eyes to open on their own. Meanwhile, they'd been there the whole time. Annette studied him silently, her single vermilion eye burning with awe. A small smile curled the corner of her lips and she commented, "Your eyes are beautiful." Northern was also shocked by her comment. "His eyes are beautiful." He grinned belatedly. "Well, they've always been beautiful." No, this is different. Your eyes are definitely different. Kind of dark beauty. And what are those black veins beneath your eyes?" Northern turned to the cabinet beside his bed. He opened each drawer, rummaging until he managed to find a portable mirror. Then he stared into it. A small frown fell on his face as he saw himself, his eyes and his face. "Why do I look so lifeless?" Then he understood what Shin had said after his awakening as a master. Indeed, he looked like a walking corpse, too pale. His irises swirled with electric blue, shot through with veins of deepest sapphire. At its center, a void of absolute black pulled at the senses, threatening to swallow. Black cracks spiderwebbed from the void of absolute black across the azure expanse, like fissures in ancient ice, hinting at barely contained power straining to break free. Light pulsed from within, as if the eye itself were alive with an inner fire, casting an ethereal glow that danced across its surface. Framed by wispy lashes and set against the stark white of its setting, his eyes seemed to float in darkness. It was beautiful and terrifying, alluring yet alien. To look upon it was to feel a ponderous weight burden one's soul. There was a sense of cold dread that accompanied his gaze. All in all, it was breathtaking that even Northern was speechless. While he looked the same, he was at the same time different. It looked like a dark and gloomy air was going to keep following him henceforth. And when he did manage to smile, it'd be a horrible grin that instilled fear in the tender-hearted. He could sense all the trouble he was going to get trying to socialize with this kind of face. Oh well, I'm not the sociable type to begin with. If he had ever had a hope to at any point socialize, that hope today had been crushed. It was sad, but life goes on. The likes of me and the power I wield are better away from the crowd anyway. It's better I get used to it now. Northern dropped the mirror, letting out a sigh. Then he looked at Annette, who kept her gaze stuck on his for a few awkward seconds, until Northern cautioned her. "Please stop staring." She blinked and averted her gaze, awkwardly apologizing. "I'm sorry. There was just this pull about it that was irresistible." She then frowned to the ground and squinted her eyes at Northern as she asked, "Do your eyes have some kind of charming effects?" Northern looked at her with a slight strain in his expression. Seriously, if that was all there was to it, I'd be so happy. He sighed and answered her. I don't think so. I kind of know its capabilities but not all at the moment. I don't think charming effects are a part of what my eyes can do. Why do you ask? Annette was silent for a few heartbeats. Her gaze fell down in deep thoughts. Then she looked at Northern and said, You know of heritage, right? Of course, I have one myself. Yes. She pointed to her eyes. My vermilion eyes are supposedly a kind of heritage. They say it's a rare occasion when one's true name, talent, and heritage are linked to the same source. Northern raised a brow. What source? Annette straightened her shoulders to gesture with her hands. I'm not entirely sure, but because of that connection, my ancestors had a unique ocular heritage that went down the line as a lineage ability. She paused and slowly removed the eye patch covering her other eye. It was dark and empty at first, but barely a second later, a vermilion spark ignited in the hollow socket of her eye. She parted her hair to the side and hung it behind her ears so Northern could take a good look. He frowned interestingly as he observed her eyes, feeling his react slightly to it. Easily, some things resonated in his soul, like he knew what he didn't know a second before now. Your eyes amplify your soul essence? Annette nodded her head. To be exact, we call it fire essence. My family found a technique to tap into the essence of fire through soul essence. This caused our soul to take on the form of a fire, and its essence is what we channel. She paused and breathed, then continued. We are the closest to the reach of fire that there could be, but we are not the only ones that have managed a feat of this level. You'll find several of them in the Central Plains, families in prestigious kingdoms and independent clans. Her gaze towards Northern became more stern. I think you may have awakened a heritage like mine. Except that I'm damn sure that this isn't a heritage. And there's no link between my true name and my heritage. And as a matter of fact, he didn't even have a talent to begin with. Except for the influence of chaos, the origin of All Eyes remained a mystery even to Northern. But he followed what Annette was saying. The information was very useful to him. At least now, I know that I am not the only one with ocular abilities. Chapter 478. Wistful Conversation. Northern and Annette discussed a bit more about ocular abilities. Throughout it all, Annette was uncautiously divulging all the information about her own ocular abilities. And it seemed like hers was still mediocre compared to what other members of her clan usually awakened. It wasn't like she didn't have a family. She had just been cast out for some shameful things she did, although she refused to tell Northern these shameful things. Northern couldn't begin to imagine the disgraceful things she must have done. She was a drunkard after all. People like her were always up to shameful acts. Their conversation became less serious as Northern tried to pry into what she had done to be sent away from her family at the age of 19. But Annette didn't budge. After a while, Northern then asked about what her plans were. The question caused suspense in the atmosphere between the two of them. She paused, seeming to seriously consider some things. After a while, she scratched her hair and sighed. Then she put back her eye patch and began explaining to Northern. You remember when you first met me, right, when you first came to the Citadel? Northern nodded. Of course I do. Why would I forget something like that? It was the beginning of my hell. Annette's expression was choleric as she continued. Well, it seemed that the headmaster and Ruffsburg knew something. Because he was the main reason why we came here. Northern folded his arms. I know that Gilbert and Ruffsburg had something together, and I don't think I care about that fact anymore. I'm asking what you are going to do if Ruffsburg shows up. He's a paragon. You can't fight him. Well, he wouldn't fight me too. Northern raised a brow. You guys didn't particularly follow through what I assume his plan would be. Even if Ruffsburg wanted us to come back, I don't assume it'd be anytime soon. Moreover, I am pretty sure he threw me in that rift to die. However, here I am and neither you nor Gilbert did anything about it. Although Gilbert did try. Northern's memory juggled back to the two guys that tailed him into the forest. That must have been when Gilbert withdrew his future attempts. Gilbert tried to do what? Annette asked with a scowl. But Northern was quick to dismiss her stern concern. Don't worry about it, he didn't even get a chance to act. Answer the question I'm asking you. Well. Annette suddenly paused. She frowned, belatedly realizing something. Northern stared at her indifferently, his devilish eyes slightly widened. What? Who do you think you are using that tone with? I'm more than 10 years older than you. Northern rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure. Forgive me. That does not sound genuine. That's as genuine as you'd get. What the hell, you think I can't defeat you because you're a master? I'm a sage now, remember? Northern's eyes rounded. Oh? You crossed again. Annette grinned proudly. Yes, I crossed again. She folded her arms again. Northern looked at her with an acknowledging smile on his own face. That's very impressive. How did you manage such a feat? The sea was not an easy traverse, with how active I was in the monster outpour at Lothelowin. I took the opportunity again and stood on the front line. It was thanks to people like me, Zephyr and Helena, that no one was lost. Northern raised his eyes in glee. That is a serious achievement. It's wonderful. Annette gave one more giggle before her expression became somewhat despondent. Noticing it, Northern inquired, What's wrong? You lost someone after all. Annette shook her head. No. Some things are just quite sad. Like, aside from the fact that I was standing on the front line, Braham was another strong reason why we had no loss of healing. His healing abilities really are amazing. It would have done the world a good if it was given to someone else, someone like Ellis, for example. Northern looked at her blankly. Hearing her, he could understand the change of her expression. It must have been hard accepting someone that caused a major drift and disaster in the stronghold. However, Braham must have known his worth and used it to present a reasonable offer, which in the end turned out to work in the benefit of the entire cohort. He is a value through and through, but a disgusting human. If his talent is that good, perhaps I should copy it. Annette raised her head, trying to suppress the bitterness her decision to accept Braham was causing her. Don't worry, I think you made a good call. And your decision kind of saved a lot of people. So, I don't think there's anything you should be beating yourself up for. Annette blinked at him, frozen for a moment. What? Northern frowned. I never thought you would ever be capable of sympathy. I don't know what you mean. Oh, you definitely have grown. Like I said, I don't know what you mean. Northern looked away from her with a calm and collected front. Ever since he returned, everything about him had been composed and mature. For some reason, he didn't even look like he was 16. Annette took a long gaze at him. She averted her gaze and hesitated, then said in a melancholic tone, So, Raven and Terence? Did you see them? Northern's expression became blithe. He breathed and deadpanned. No, I didn't. But I was told that they are being held captive in Lewingard. Annette nodded her head somberly at his words. What? Do you want to go back to rescue them? It's not funny. I know you and Rain had your stuff, but cut the young lady some slack. What do you know? He said with a slightly irritated tone. An awkward silence hung between the two of them for a while. Northern sighed and interrupted the tense peace. So, what is really your plan against Ruffsburg? He's a paragon. You know you being a sage won't make much of a difference. Annette looked at his face. Well, I plan to go to the academy and become an instructor there. Northern's mouth fell. Huh? How many screws did you lose? Chapter 479, Mitochondria and Nucleus. Northern spent some time thinking about Annette's bold plan even after she had left. She had said to him that that was the best course of action she could go through in order to preserve her life. And he was seriously considering if it was. And after a lot of objective thoughts, he could at the very least tell that there was a semblance of sense in whatever Annette was planning to do. Even though she planned to return to the academy, she didn't plan to do it silently. Fact was, a place like the academy cannot be returned to silently. It was the center of the continent and the center of attraction. The one place every clan, noble, and nation sets their gaze upon. Apart from renowned drifters, The Academy has also produced prestigious scholars, engineers, noble workers who have in many ways contributed to the advancement of civilization and technology in the Central Plains. It was so much of a focal point that they had their own media outlet in every nation. And every country receives daily news of whatever is going on within its walls. Of course, activities like this are spearheaded and overwatched by the Student Council, who are a separate powerhouse in the Academy, backed by their powerful parents and relationships. Annette plans to cause a ruckus and use this powerhouse to bring herself to the spotlight. Even if Ruffsburg ends up being rash, he wouldn't be stupid. She had also mentioned that she wants to build a life for herself. Now that she's a sage, she can be greedy. Being a master, the most she could make of her life after she hit a great wall, was being a citadel instructor. But now that she's a sage, it was a different story entirely. The Academy would pay heavily to hire a teacher like her. Moreover, her fire-based talent is a gem for the mage class. While her plan looked bold and rash, Northern didn't think it was entirely reckless. It made him question what he was going to do. All I just want to do is go home and meet my mother first. And speaking of that, why has Shin been avoiding the subject? His mind wandered off with a little bit of concern. Then he shook all the branches of thoughts that tugged his mind and lay on his bed, hands crossed behind his head. He stared at the ceiling with an optimistic expression. I'm sure all is well. Maybe things have become complicated between the both of them. Northern let out a small smile, staring at the ceiling. Then a couple of minutes later, he closed his eyes to take a little nap. Not long afterwards, Shin finally came inside. Even though Northern was asleep, he had felt his father's footsteps coming even before he entered the building itself. That was one of the boosts to his spatial awareness since he could see. While being blind for the past 1 week, Northern had been surviving on spatial awareness to keep himself alerted. This forced him to sharpen his senses to be able to tell steps apart from each other, most especially the people that visited him frequently. Annette had a strong and intense stride. Vita was almost like Annette, but hers carried a rhythm. Northern had sometimes wondered if it was intentional or unintentional. And most of the time, she usually came with Annette, except the last time. Ella's stride was almost wobbly. The guy was always walking like he would fall every 2 seconds. And Shin had a purposeful and calculated stride, sometimes soft and tender. Just like now. As Shin entered the room, Northern opened his eyes and propped himself up slowly. Shin, surprised to see his son's eyes opened, rushed to Northern's side, supporting him by placing his hands behind his slim back. Northern looked at Shin and smiled with a nod. I'm fine, he said as he placed his legs down. He stood up and stretched his body, feeling his bones squeeze out all the accumulated fatigue of just sitting. For the past 1 week, he had only tried to move just once. And that was when he tried to get acclimated with his body. He was able to move, throw a few punches and kicks at Ellis, but he felt like he was fighting in a box of darkness, and the punches he threw felt like guess punches and kicks. Since then he just focused on meditation. He would enter the limitless void, sit on his throne and circulated the void essence. That was another thing that had changed since he became a master. This body was different from the kind of body he was used to. The essence in his body before now felt like they were in a pool. All he had to do was draw and use them, which was why he found it very easy to use his clones as a refill point. One of the things his link between him and his clones was known for was its ability to ingrain in him the experience of his clone. Of course, because he had grown much more powerful than they, and their experience had become much less significant than his overall experience, the process hurt less. Their experience, abilities, and moreover, gains are ingrained into his body. So when his clones are filled with essence in their essence pool, the essence being a real product is transferred to him. But now, it was different. The essence didn't just sit in a pool, they were flowing across his body. Northern felt like that way. Their effectiveness was enhanced, and the amount of things one could do with their essence became vast and versatile. It is probably why soul essence can take on the appearance of flame in Annette, and a fundamental reason why her family was able to tap into the essence of flame itself, reforming their soul to take on its appearance. And in the past 1 week Northern had learned a lot, which made him conclude that, while talent and talent abilities may sound like the mitochondria of a drifter, essence is the nucleus of the drifter. It would be ignorant and stupid to ignore the versatility soul essence provides all because one has an overpowered talent. Northern exhaled in relief as he dropped his hand. Then he looked at Shin. We do have a lot to catch up on, don't we? Chapter 480. A Painful Separation Part 1. Shin wordlessly stared at Northern, who stood in the same fashion before him. But he was poised with outspoken confidence. An air of coldness swiveled around him. Not visibly, but it made Shin and anyone that was around Northern feel like they were not supposed to go beyond a certain distance. As if their death was hanging on a string of thread and should they move it would snap. But Shin had to distract himself from the heavy thoughts of Northern's imposing presence. It was pretty easy because his son had finally seemed ready to talk. The past 1 week he had been going and coming, hoping to find the best opportunity to speak to him. But every time Shin had tried speaking, he always felt like his mouth was suddenly sewn together. Other times the words just felt so heavy that his tongue would give in before the words got to make it. But today seemed like it would be a different story. Shin tried to let out a smile, subduing all other emotions. Yeah, we have a lot to catch up on. He paused and observed his son with a pained and tender look in his eyes. You've grown, he added. Northern smiled widely, then shrugged. Well, with the kind of hell one is forced to live in the dark continent, change is inevitable. Northern exhaled loudly. As much as I'd love to discuss all the painful, dreadful, distasteful, unpleasant, harrowing, agonizing, tormenting and torturous I experienced, I am more concerned about something else, so I'll just ask. Shin's breath became slightly unsteady, and no matter how subtle it was, with the kind of eyes Northern now had, he could just see it. It was like a pattern in the air. If he was to put it to perfect explanation, it was like he could see the sound of Shin's breathing. Before now, they all had a regular pattern. However, the moment it changed, Northern saw something that automatically translated into nervousness to him. Going forward, it was obviously going to be hard for people to hide their emotions before him. It would also be very difficult for them to tell a lie. Because like Terence relied on essence detection to tell things like this, he relied on the image of sound which was not visible to anyone before him and before now. Shin gathered the tongue muscle to speak not too long after the question was asked. He opened his mouth, attracting Northern's attention. Then his lips trembled as he started. I think I should start from the very beginning for you. Shin clenched his fist so hard that a metal would have wrenched within his grip. He looked like he was drawing the strength to speak from his fist. Northern stared at him calmly while he said that, took a pause and continued. His voice shook yet again. You know, we have always loved you. You are the apple of our eyes. The moment you came into Aisha's and my life was the moment everything just fell into place for us. It was the moment everything ever felt right. Every word that came out of his mouth shivered from the cold of what lay further beyond his tongue. Shin wished he didn't have to break this news to his son. Having to say this truth made his heart heavy and burdened his shoulders that he felt weakened physically. He raised his face to meet his son. Northern wasn't so obviously taller than Shin, but he stood in a position where Shin would have to move his iris up a little bit to focus on his. Shin finally opened his mouth again after a short break. And all the while, Northern couldn't help but worry in fear. What exactly could be wrong to have him so shaken? You were adopted. The words broke out of his mouth like they forcibly though through a wall of sinew. Oh, that. Northern was so caught by the surprise that he forgot to pretend and act accordingly. He just stared blankly at Shin. That seriously was it? He thought aloud, causing Shin to be taken aback as well. Shin stared at him in confusion, replying immediately, with a tone as confused as his eyes. No, not exactly. But did you know before? After realizing that he had messed up, Northern quickly thought of a way to save himself. Which was pretty easy. I found out in the dark continent. Ha! Northern slumped to his butt on the bed as he answered. Well, turns out that my birth mother is sister to the Emperor of Luengard Empire. Shin's eyes widened in shock. The shock was of two components. One, I knew he was always a big deal from the apparel he was draped in, but an imperial prince of Luengard? He didn't even know his son was of Riemgard. Knowing that would have rendered him weak in the legs. He was raising a scion of the Riemgard family, whose history transcended several others in the Central Plain and the world in general. They dated so far back into the ages that set their imperial authority aside. Their family was a tremendous force to be reckoned with on its own. A drifter with the name Riemgard, red-haired, who was a master, is 10 times, undiluted and not exaggerated in any form, stronger than a normal master in the Central Plains. And the second, that made way after Shin's initial shock. His eyes contorted with depression and pain as he thought about how Northern must have felt to realize such truth alone. It made his heart scream with pain before he heard Northern's voice and removed his face from the ground. While I do have questions for you and Mom about that, I don't think that's a really important matter right now. Northern gave Shin that intense look of seriousness as his voice grew silent for a moment. Then his hoarse tone resumed. It's been a week since I came here, since I made it alive from the dark continent. His eyes keenly observed Shin. They were deep as the water in a narrow well on a dark night. And somehow, you've not said a single word about Mom or Silver. Now his eyes had a subdued, dangerous light, hiding in their depth, dimming. Father, what exactly is going on? If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.